Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Health Bridge podcast. I am Holly B., your host, and today I am introducing you to Meagan Pilawski. She is a scientist who spent years working as a nurse in palliative and end of life care. Her close personal experience with healing autoimmune diseases and in working with the dying process led to a very deep interest in entheogenic and sacred plant medicines. She received her master's in medical cannabis science from the University of Maryland Baltimore School of Pharmacy. She's also an attuned Reiki Master and a certified yoga teacher. She facilitates ganja and kundalini yoga experiences in the greater Tampa Bay area of Florida. And she hopes to use her experience and research to continue to identify plant compounds and modalities that facilitate the healing of deep cellular traumas and addictions. Meagan has quite the personal story to share, and we will get deep into what it is that she experienced with her health and how she came through that journey into what she's doing today. We talk about how to refine your toolbox and how to understand that there's more than one road to health, but that really all roads start inside. They start in here, in your heart, in your soul, and acknowledging the beauty that you are inside and the love that you are filled with. And from that starting point, miracles are truly possible. We also talk about ceremony and the sacred aspects of life and how to incorporate more of that into your life experience to enrich it and to heal and to help others. It's a really beautiful way of experiencing life, and it's something that we really don't have that much in our culture here in America. So it's a very important conversation to have. If you are struggling with chronic health issues, this is a very interesting program for you to listen to, whether you are open and interested in plant medicine or not. She has an incredible journey to share, and there might be portions of it that you can relate to in your healing journey as well. So I invite you to listen in and enjoy this episode. Meagan, thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your story today. I really appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable and sharing some things today that might be new to some of our listeners.
Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for just reaching out. Like, we are already this beautiful connection that's going to reach people. I think it's important for people to share their stories. So thank you for doing what you do.
Your story is quite extensive. So I think before we get into even all the background, basically in a snippet, you struggled with an autoimmune disease for many years and really, really, really struggled to the depths. What I think I want to start with is, where was the kind of aha moment or the light bulb moment or the catalyst that something just shifted in you and changed the trajectory of your experience in the illness and how you eventually came through and healed?
That's a great point to start with. Thank you. Yeah, it just pops in my head immediately, because like the moment you hit your rock bottom is like where alchemy begins. So it'll always be like a very vivid experience in my mind and my body. So I was struggling with autoimmune disease, like you said, for years. It really reached this peak where it had started to affect my lungs and my ability to take a deep breath. Not my lungs directly, but the muscles outside of my lungs were stuck in this. It's called an MS hug, but it feels like a Charlie horse. I couldn't expand. And it was very atypical presentation. It usually, waxes and wanes, and mine just kind of stuck for like 3 months straight. I was in the hospital consulting doctors, trying to find something to break this spasm, basically. And they did something, a little bit out of the ordinary that ended up in a medical journal, actually. But long story short, they did an ablation on the muscles around my lungs that were contracted. And for the first time in 92 days, I was able to take a deep breath. So it's actually a really like simple answer, but the breath is so important because it's the bridge to the body, to the mind, to the soul, to higher states of consciousness. And when I got that instant relief, it was just this deep, deep inhale, like into like every cell in my body. And I'm sure like biochemically, there's this huge rush of like endogenous DMT and whatnot, but it made for a very like mystical experience where it was the first time that I really felt like I was like speaking with God, if you will. And I just realized I saw the bigger picture of everything and how there was a pain body cycle that was perpetuating all of those years of suffering. And it was just a very simple, like, this is my rock bottom, and I will absolutely never allow myself to get here again. All this time I've been, searching for all these external tools to make me feel better and this sort of like victim mindset, but I had like matches in my pocket the whole time, and that was the little switch that reminded me. And I knew that like I needed to make a lot of changes in my life and probably completely deprogram many things that I knew after having a mystical experience like that. So that led to me taking some of those first steps afterwards, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that was that aha moment for me.
When you say you had matches in your pocket the whole time, what you mean by that is like you could have taken out those matches. We're talking figuratively and
Yeah.
lit the fire, right?
Yeah. Figuratively, it's like your own power. We lie a lot of power in, not that there's like anything wrong with doctors, like Western medicine obviously does have its value. I think that can be different with chronic illnesses a lot of times, but it just placing that external power in everyone else and not in myself. When I know my body and my traumas better than anyone, I could sit and talk to a shrink all day, but they're never gonna understand, how my body reacted and how deeply compacted those traumas got into my cells and my predisposition to like manifest that through my physical vessel. So yeah, like an analogy for your own power, your agni, your fire, your vitality.
So now that we understand that you have this catalyst point towards healing, take us back a little bit further. What are those traumas that you're referring to? What was your experience with it was multiple sclerosis, I believe you said. How did that start showing up in your life? How did you end up at that point in the hospital?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like sharing this because it is actually a pretty like atypical presentation. I completely acknowledge that a lot of people with autoimmune diseases have to go through the ringer trying to get a diagnosis. As you know very well, it's very, very non-specific. A lot of times you're blown off. I was lucky in the sense that because I sort of, well, I'll back up a little bit. I was pregnant at 22 and I gave birth about like 30 days before I sat for my boards. I like rushed to finish everything in time and passed my boards, and went to my first week as a brand new like baby nurse, worked like my first 12-hour shift ever, and then was very, very tired when I got home. Very tired, like running into walls, tired, but it's like, oh, you're a new mom, you just worked a 12-hour shift, sort of, and brushed it off. And I just went to bed and I woke up the next morning. I couldn't really move the left side of my body. It was very spastic. I had, well, what I know now was optic neuritis, but it was almost like this tunneling double vision, very scary. So it was very like cut and dry. And when I did speak to the neurologists about that, they had a theory that it was probably like the protective factor of the pregnancy, and that extra estrogen and all of those hormones that were circulating around was masking the development of the disease. And it was probably just that moment where I'd returned to sort of my prepartum state that it just hit like that. So like I said, that is pretty atypical, but I was lucky in getting diagnosed because it was so much of a sudden onset. They were like evaluating for CNS lymphoma, especially after they saw all the involvement and the lesions on the brain and the spinal cord. So yeah, so that's how it started. I was in the hospital initially, I think about 12 days or so. It was just such a strong attack. They were exchanging some of the plasma out like through a dialysis catheter. So the plasma like holds your antibodies. So filtering that out is just a way to try and calm an acute attack. And they were combining that with obviously high dose steroids and just establishing long-term care and things like that. And then so over the next several years, I tried my best to manage the disease, but still actively be a nurse. And those two things didn't go together too well for me. It was very, very common for me to just clock out and then walk one floor down to the ER, and they would just have the steroids ready for me, still in my scrubs, sometimes just admitted, still in my scrubs. But I was not really willing to accept it. I had a really hard time accepting that because I am someone who has such drive and like I want to be in service to humanity. So I would say over the next several years, it was just the depression was a huge part of it, perpetuated a lot. But I also failed or would have antibodies to lots of treatments or terrible infusion reactions. And that went on for years. I lost 3 organs from the MS drugs, multiple surgeries, just very, very immunocompromised, getting very, very sick from patients, missing a lot of work, just really, really struggling. And that also led to, a lot of just, it messed with my mental health a lot too, just being pretty much steroid dependent and getting those sort of doses. Very sad. So that went on for several years. And I went up to get evaluated for years ago. They were doing stem cell transplants. There was a physician named Dr. Burt. He's retired now, but he had stem cell transplant trials up at Northwestern in Chicago. So I went up to get evaluated by him and the team of neurologists. Said, go home and try one more treatment because it's like this Mac Daddy treatment. It just came out. Like it's the strongest of the strong. It'll be great. If that doesn't work, then yes, please come back up and we'll do that for you. So I said, okay. And I went home. It was called Ocrevus. It's like a humanized rituximab, a biologic. I had terrible, terrible infusion reaction that really gave me a lot of trauma because it was a near-death experience where there was airway management and epi and all of that. And something really like shifted in me right then. That was a very traumatic moment that sticks out to me, that just accumulated over the years. And also just little things like, missing my son's birthday because they wouldn't let me leave the hospital, things like that. So yeah, so that all accumulated over the years, I guess you could say. And that was, also impacted by not really knowing how to like process those emotions or to pay attention to the things that I was taking on, which I might not label as traumatic in the moment because it was part of my job, but I never really gave myself time to integrate. Like with the type of nursing I was doing was a lot of palliative oncology, and I took care of like comfort measured patients. So what that means is comfort measures only. You're putting them on morphine drips, terminal extubations, things like that. Many times they weren't going to be able to make it to the hospice house, so you just make them comfortable. So just being in the morgue and stuff a lot is not a normal day-to-day thing for most, I would imagine. So just little things like that accumulated over time, and I think that's like what ultimately led to that manifestation around like the lung area and really feeling that like life force being ripped out of me, which thankfully led to that rock bottom so that I could start my journey back up.
When traditional Chinese medicine, lungs are associated with grief.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at it from that lens and hearing the years and years of small to large traumas stacked on top of each other. And you just kept going and going and going. If you weren't laid up, you were actively working in the hospital, and then you were actively dealing with more physical trauma within your disease that you were battling.
Right.
And I can see how that could accumulate energetically into that lung space. And you
Yeah.
said you had, what was it, 3 months of not being able to take a breath?
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever had a Charlie horse in your arm or your leg or something, but it's just this
Yeah.
tightness, and it was baffling for a lot because it's like it wasn't a direct lung injury, so I'm not desatting. So that leads to, a lot of physicians who do not understand, like, let's just be frank, the like chronic illnesses like that, and oh, it's in your head, or just relax, or you're not desatting, so I wasn't trained to handle this. There's nothing that I can do. That sort of feedback is also, I think, important to bring up because it's deeply, deeply isolating for patients.
Mhm.
Outside of MS, lupus, all of that. I know that that's a very common theme with autoimmune diseases, especially like when it's so variable, the presentation. You put people and you put things into a box, they don't fit exactly within that box of how you've learned it, then you get written off. And that can in turn like perpetuate the suffering cycle that the patient is like really asking for help and answers trying to get out of.
And it can create a depressive cycle that wasn't there to begin with. When you're
Correct.
consistently told, no, you're not experiencing this, no, you're not feeling that.
It makes you question your own mind, and is it psychosomatic because this pain is real? And in the moment I can't really think of like, oh, I'm suffering so much from this memory that's why I'm hurting. All I know is like I generally feel okay, but I'm in a lot of pain. But then I have other people telling me, oh, no, you're fine. It's probably in your head. Well, how do I fix that? And if it is in my head, was it caused by one of those lesions? It just leaves you in this bubble of confusion, questioning
Mhm.
your own body, and your body holds more wisdom than your deepest philosophy. So that right there is the issue, like perpetuating that cycle, bringing people farther away from listening to their body. That dialect of sensation is a problem, because really like how I healed was going the complete opposite direction and learning to listen to my body more and external sources much less.
Now, what was your experience like being a nurse, being active in that profession that was essentially shutting you down when it came to dealing with your disease? That must have been such a, I don't know what the right word is, but such a mind twist.
Yes, because let me preface by saying it's a very noble profession, and my experience is just my experience. But on the floor that I was working on, particularly with, it was a very sad floor to be on. You don't want to be on our floor. Everybody was very ill. There was constantly a nurse out for a surgery, a major illness, and we were not really given. A free pizza party is fantastic, or cinnamon buns, that's great, but actually it's not great to be honest, but I won't get into that right now. Everyone was very sick, and I think that there's some of the unhealthiest people I've ever met, and it's sad that they provide this container for us to teach others, but you know despite your best efforts, you can't pee, you can't eat. You're lecturing patients and educating them on how to be healthier and how to stay out of the hospital, but you know meanwhile I was having to like pop a bunch of prescribed Adderall just to like get through the day. I was like eating very unhealthy. None of us could take a break. None of us could go to the bathroom. The patient loads were extremely unsafe. Yeah. So, and especially with that type of nursing, I was always told I was good at it, but I think that you really need to be in check with clearing your energy, regardless of whether you believe in that stuff. I mean, everyone's felt a denseness or a density in the like a room that you walk into or a funeral. Like no one can deny that. And I think it's really important to cleanse yourself, because I see a lot of really, really sick and unhealthy habits from nurses and inpatient hospital support staff.
It's not a field that's set up for success in that sense. It's sick care, it's not wellness care as much as we want it to be. I've never understood how the hospital systems are set up in such a way that it almost seems dangerous to
It
be
is.
under the care of a nurse or a doctor who's been on a 24-hour shift cycle.
Right. You should see the
Or even
list
a
that the
12 hour.
hospitals have to see, it's like a quick 30-second review. Yeah, what's going on here? Sometimes standing at the doorway, sometimes charting that they listened to the patient, but they didn't. And I was there and I witnessed it, just stuff like
Wow.
that. And you're also very confined to, I mean, it's getting better now that you see a lot more like holistic nursing or like psychedelic nurse. So there are little small snippets of expanding, but you're pretty limited to the physical vessel. And that is not like whole care because we are more than our lab values. So I think that's where a lot of the pushing against that friction for me was. I mean, it's all
Mhm.
encompassing. So I use the analogy one time I got yelled at by the charge nurse because I had a comfort measures only patient that I was taking care of, and she passed away. And her husband of 55 years was clearly having a rough time, as any of us would. And he was an elderly gentleman, and I wanted to like make sure that he got to his car. Okay, in my head, that's an extension of the care. I feel morally responsible if he goes and crashes his car into a pole or something, because he's overwhelmed. And so I helped pack up her things and walked into his car, and I got like reamed for it on the way home. Like, come on, we need to like clear this room, get another patient in. Like, that's not your responsibility. So it was just things like that where I realized like I went in with a very good intention, and I think that a lot of nursing students, aspiring nurses, do. Like, I want to help people, and then you pass meds, and you call when there's a critical lab value, or you help in a code and stuff. But if you're looking to actually help people on a bigger scale, then it wasn't for me. I couldn't find that with nursing.
I think virtually everyone that goes into the medical field goes in with positive intentions because they genuinely want to help. The system just isn't always set up that way. I want to go back to what you were talking about clearing your energy. I agree. The energy is palpable. And when you are surrounded with such intense energy, like you were particularly on the floor that you worked with, it's tangible. You can feel it. And, some people that might hear clearing your energy and think, oh, that's so woo woo. I don't believe in that stuff. But you can take that same idea and apply it to what you do believe in. Praying to God is also going to clear your energy. It doesn't have to be lighting the sage and going into a
Yes,
trance to cut your energy cords. You can
correct.
think
Yeah.
about it in many different ways. So I just want to make that approachable to some that are new to that idea.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that you did because I, as a nurse, would definitely be the type of person who would have rolled their eyes at that. But, that energy also tied into me being in a resting state. I was in my sympathetic nervous system. I didn't even know what it felt like. And I almost want to say my body, you get addicted to that feeling, right? So it's like even after work, I don't know how to facilitate that calm, to clear my energy, whatever you want to label it, so that it sounds good to you. I remember listening to true crime podcasts on the way home from a 14-hour shift where, I've been in the morgue 3 or 4 times, seen things I can't unsee. That was my comfortable place. So I just stayed there. That density, I didn't know how to feel otherwise. And you're correct. It's not always like doing a mapacho prayer or bathing under the full moon. Like that sounds really great and stuff, but sometimes it's just taking a salt bath or a few minutes off the screen and letting yourself regulate, or just like a mental mantra, like anything that doesn't belong to me, if you could just clear. It doesn't have to be woo woo. like you said.
Exactly.
But it's very
Exactly.
important. We have sheaths, we have layers to ourselves, and that's getting into the subtle layers, which matter very much because they can compile.
To back up just a little bit, what you were talking about with your body getting addicted to being in that elevated state, that sympathetic state,
Mhm.
it's true. Your body actually is addicted to it. I think you've worked with Joe Dispenza's practices, and he talks a lot about how the nervous system is there to keep you feeling safe, right? And what is safe means what is normal. So if your normal state is in this hyped up fight or flight response, that's
Mhm.
what it's going to try to keep you in. And
Correct.
it's going to do anything it can think of to keep you in that state. You know, this is all like the programming running behind the scenes. So until we can realize that there's programming behind the scenes and
Mm.
start tuning into that, that's when we can start making, you know, subtle shift after subtle shift after subtle shift, clear, taking moments to clear our energy, taking moments to sit and breathe, taking moments to get outside and just, you know, get real sunlight in your eyes, like all those things, those,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. Sometimes it's simple as like what I was saying about the podcast, just being mindful about like what sort of energies or things you're watching or listening to a couple hours before bed. That's a very subtle thing, but super, super important. You know, I don't listen to those really anymore. It's fun, you know, and it used to not bother me, like being floated to another floor or just seeing something very traumatic or something like that. It didn't bother me. And now I can't like I can't even watch like an action movie. I can't handle like anything now because I've just really like, made home with myself and my nervous system and what's safe and what's good. And, you know, how do I feel in my body after I listen to a podcast? I could listen to one of those, but I'm probably going to notice I'm a little more angsty up in my crown. So just paying attention, knowing yourself, because that's going to be different mostly for everybody. And that's where like the self journey and the self study comes in.
so let's get into your self study and your journey. You had that aha moment. The matches are in my pocket the whole time. How did that change your trajectory? Where did you go next?
Oh,
Emotionally, physically, spiritually?
I knew that like it was very profound, that experience. And I knew that it was going to be years of refining your toolbox, right? The first thing I wanted to do was just start on the most basic foundational level, and that's the body. I wanted to change my diet, and I wanted the 18 medications that I was on out of my system. So I decided to get the clinician assisted ketamine infusions. That was the first step. I'd read a lot about it. I was obviously very familiar with that medication in the hospital, but not what it's been doing for PTSD and depression. So I started looking into it, decided to pull the trigger on that. And I said, this like seems like the thing that could sort of light the fire under my butt to facilitate these changes. And that's exactly what it did. It was 6 infusions, so twice a week for 3 weeks. This was a few years back. And I did also have a very mystical experience. I think it would have been like my fifth or maybe even the last session where it was very profound. And I was sort of had an out of body experience. Some might call it like astral projection, where I was watching myself get the infusion, but from much higher in the room. And then I sort of went on this journey, and I don't know where exactly it was. I think a lot of people would probably call that like the Akashic records, but it was sort of this wishing well of like swirling moments. And as I looked closer, was every moment that I've ever lived in this life and others. And you could, pull out a scene, and watch it and put it back in. And there were these sort of non-human looking little balls of energy sort of like gathered around it. And they sort of like telepathically communicated like like you figured it out. You got to your rock bottom and you actually figured it out. So that was a very cool message, like, to hear. It made me feel like it was the first reincarnation, I have figured it out. And then I sort of came back down into my body. So that was mid infusion. That was like in the medicine. But the changes that I noticed following were a lot more subtle. Someone would cut me off in traffic, and my first thought wasn't to flick them off. It was like, wow, well, I really hope they get where they're going safely. I'll just send them some love. But what was interesting is, like, I didn't have a second to think about it. That was my knee-jerk reaction, which was very different for me. So I just took note of it and tried to stay a little bit in the observer mind. It was good for me to practice that during that time period. And with the help of those, I was actually able to get off all the antidepressants, actually really everything, even the spasm medications, all of it. So I did those infusions in February. I think by the first week of April, I was off of 18 medications completely. Never went
That's
back on.
incredible.
I have a couple like PRN emergency things written, but I couldn't even tell you the last time I've had to take them. And at the same time I was doing that, I also decided to eliminate just a little bit at a time so I could really set myself up for success with my diet and try and shift my mindset. Because for years as a nurse and when I was very sick, my thought process was, well, this disease has total control over me, and I am not, like, I don't know if I can curse, but I'm not going to like let it fucking take like the last thing for me. Like the pizza, like, I'm not doing this. That's dumb. I'm not going to do the gluten-free. I'm not going to do vegan. Like, this is the only thing I have left in my life. Like, it completely controls my life. And so that's what it was for years. I manifested that, and that's exactly how it stayed. But I decided to change my outlook. And so around that same time I was weaning off the medicine, I just took like one more thing away each week. Every week I went to Chipotle. I took one more ingredient off until it was completely vegan. And that worked for me for a while. I was really just like completely deprogramming, just getting rid of so much energetic sludge, correcting my gut biome and things like that. So being clean of everything allowed me to step into more unconventional and holistic tools in my toolbox, which I'm kind of excited to talk about. But the first one was working with the combo medicine, which is the secretion from the Medusa bicolor, the Amazonian tree frog. And it contains a lot of peptides. So a little gate is called, that a little dot is burned onto the skin, just taking off that top layer of epidermis, and then that's applied onto the skin. And it's filled with all these peptides and phylokinins and things like that. And it causes this huge reset, this lymphatic flush. It works through the lymphatic system. So it's purging toxins out, usually every which way. So it's a very purgative medicine, but very good. It is legal in the US. It's not like a scheduled substance, because it's not considered a psychedelic or psychoactive. It's working more on the physical. I've certainly seen people have emotional releases, so I'm not downplaying that by any means, but it's like a purgative medicine. So that allowed me to clean my vessel a little bit. And I went to a very trusted practitioner, and I like interviewed him on the phone first and stuff, and sat in my first ceremony. And that was really special because I also got a sense of like ceremony, and that started to make the wheels turn. It's like, how could I bring this amount of sacredness like into each moment, even if I'm not sitting with some medicine and having frog poison burned on my arm? Be like, how can I bring this into every moment? And so that was really important for me. And I started working with mushrooms a little more deeply. I've been on some nootropic, like the lion's mane and stuff, and that was really helpful. So I stayed with that consistently. But then about, every other month I'd go out like in the forest, like camping, and do like a big one, and, bring my journals and things like that. Then eventually that led me to my first ayahuasca ceremony, which was really profound. It's up in the mountains. And that was when I first really got to experience and play with energy in a way that I had sort of read about in one of Joe Dispenza's books years ago, Becoming Supernatural. He talks about these like shamanic surgeries, sort of, if you will. There's a lot of case studies that he shares about people in there who've healed through cancers and things like that through meditation. And I was on top of my meditation and improving all of that as well. But within that medicine, it was very interesting because I got to actually visualize what it is that a healed nervous system looks like. And I got to create this mind movie of how it feels and how it looks to remyelinate myself. I could care less if someone tells me if that's possible or not, because I'm exploring my own consciousness at this point in time. And I realized this is a really powerful tool when you use it properly and you don't overuse it and you integrate it. So I did continue to sit in ceremonies, and I would go in with sometimes with specific intentions, but sometimes the intention is just to surrender and get out of your mind's own way. And because sometimes the medicine knows what it's doing, and it knows that a certain trauma that maybe you haven't even thought about in years, it brings it up, and you just have to be so grateful for that, because it's, clearing out all those cells that hold on to that like body memory and stuff, and you're able to sort of look at it with a bird's eye view, if you will. Everybody that was hurt and their whole life story leading up to like the scene where they hurt you, so you're able to turn that into more compassion and let it go, and you start to feel a lot lighter, and you start to notice the actual physical changes after. I knew that there was something to it because I would do breath work or I would meditate after my surgery, and like the tremor in my hand would be 80% better if I stuck with it. And of course we fall off and we get back on. I knew it was like really powerful. And I also zeroed in on what a sacred ceremony looks like to me. I did end up finally working with the last medicine, which has probably been, like, other than cannabis, one of the most profound, and that's 5-MeO DMT. Or I actually worked with bufo. You can work with the molecule itself, but I worked with bufo down in Mexico, and that was very profound. That led me to source, I guess. Sometimes I call it a hug from God, but it just leads me to just where you're just pure consciousness, pure energy. You've transcended your vessel and all of that. You've left it behind, and you don't feel love, you are love. So that was a really powerful one for me. And I'll always kind of remember my first one, like looking back, I think I might have been served a little heavily. But I just look at that with gratitude because everything happens how it's supposed to. But I remember coming to in that ceremony and just having this, almost like the slate had been wiped clean. I had no concept of like why myself or anyone else wouldn't be deserving of love. It was how a newborn must feel when they're born. They don't question when their mom gives them a kiss, or like, oh, like, I don't even deserve that. Like, I've done so much bad. And they don't think like that. So I had a sense of that, and that was really beautiful. And I continued to work with that over the years, and I still do. So it's led me to all these different tools throughout that. Like the medicines guided me to yoga teacher training, which had been a really profound tool in my life, especially just an integrative tool. I love teaching. I love just introducing the idea of listening to your body and understanding, and starting just quieting enough to understand those shifts and when you're in them, and how to facilitate them and how not to hold on to them. So it's been like a beautiful repertoire, and one thing's led to another. So it's hard to like pinpoint one thing. All I know is that like the farther I go inside, my intention usually is no longer like it does something on a physical level. It's just to know myself on a deeper, more intimate level as I continue to work. And that's just translated to a huge improvement in my physicality. Like, obviously, I'll have to share some pictures of what I looked like before with my cane and all of that, very unhealthy. So that just like happened, and I just continue to improve. I do still check in with the neurologist once every 6 months, but mostly just to get the tests. And that's kind of for me and my left brain. I don't need the tangible data because I'm very well aware of where I was and where I went, and anyone who knows me is as well. But it does feel really good to go in and get that. And like, oh, you shaved like seconds off your time, and your little tests are so much better. And so I do still check in. And it's just also just led me to just a greater understanding of the macrocosm and these more ethereal sort of quantum questions that I've had. Like the answer is always through yourself.
I almost don't even know what to say after hearing that whole journey. Let's talk about, because I think a lot of people are really intimidated by these types of medicines,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't really understand them. They don't come out of a pill bottle, they're not prescribed by a doctor. How does somebody know when maybe they would be benefited by stepping in this direction? How do they start? What should they start with?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll back up a tiny bit and say that like those are all entheogens, which is usually a plant origin, but not always. A psychoactive that is used in a sacred context to lead to like altered or higher states of consciousness. So yes, I'm talking about some of the more strong and profound ones, ayahuasca, bufo, but cannabis can be an entheogen. And that's sort of, I think, more accessible to, depending on where you live, but to most. So I wanted to throw that out there just for a second and backtrack just a second, because I teach these. I actually do like sacred ceremonies with just CBD, because to sort of answer your question, I want people to know that like you don't have to like jump a plane to Peru if that's not calling to you. Maybe it will one day, maybe it doesn't. That's fine. It's your toolbox. Like I'm not here to tell you, but what you absolutely can do is create a ceremony for yourself within any moment. And something very like that people have heard about, like you said, people sort of fear what they don't understand. It's very scary to have to surrender, which is a vitally important part of working with an entheogen, is stepping out of your way. And so I do these ceremonies with CBD where we just create a lot of like ritual around it. And I'll do guided meditations, and we do kundalini yoga. And that alone I've had people come up to me after and say that was like a very profound, a mystical experience that can be also achieved with like breath works, certain types of breath work and things like that. As far as like looking where to go, it is a little easier now. I do feel that a lot of these modalities are becoming a little more mainstream. I will preface and protect myself by saying that, like, yes, UFO is a scheduled substance. In Mexico, it is not. So you're a tourist in Mexico. Actually, they have much bigger problem with cannabis. So it's ironic because you could be walking down the street smoking bufo out in the open, but if you're smoking a joint, you're going to get in huge trouble. So that's where I think a lot of people travel, and you hear about them going to Peru or other countries. But the really interesting thing about the quarantine is that it took that opportunity away for a lot of people. So it all at the same time sort of created this like psychedelic revolution, entheogenic revolution, because people were forced in their position to create or find those spaces at home for themselves. So there's a couple routes you can go. You can go through a little bit of a mainstream, if you will, thing like a MAPS trial or something. I tend to find those not super ceremonial and a little capitalistic in my opinion. But I think that that can provide a lot of safety for someone who declares what it is that they want. They might feel more comfortable with licensed professional, and I completely and totally respect that. So there's ketamine clinics now. We're seeing a lot of decriminalization in some states, but there's also entheogenic churches. And I was like very lucky to just come across some good friends who are lawyers who help people set up entheogenic churches. under the religious right to freedom. So I'm not a lawyer and I can't like give all the exact verbiage, but it's basically it's a sacrament. So you have like the Native American church, for example, who is protected when they use peyote because that is their sacrament and that is their it's your cognitive liberty, the right to explore your own consciousness, especially in a sacred or religious context, is one of the most fundamental rights that we have. So there's a lot of different routes we can go. You see a lot more popping up. You're seeing the ketamine clinics, even like guided psilocybin journeys and things like that. Or, like I said before, the tourism to another country if you're worried about the legality and things like that. So I find that people just sort of magnetize it into their lives when they're ready. I definitely believe in the law of attraction. And usually when someone's contemplating at that point, there's been several things that there's something that isn't working for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be exploring that, right? And typically what I've seen, what I've experienced is exactly I've been on Zoloft for however many years. I feel nothing, can't keep a relationship. I want something different, and you can't ever like force someone. And it's the entheogens are also really good at helping you like meet people where they're at. I think there's this sort of phase of awakening that I had, and I'm sure many others do as well, where you're just so profoundly awestruck by like the like immaculate healing that you facilitated for yourself that you might want to like push that on others, but you can't, because when everyone's rock bottom is at their own time, and some people just sort of stay in that, and that's okay because the universe needs all of us. So that's sort of like the ultimate pill to swallow, is like when you're figuring this stuff out and you want to share it with your loved ones and they're maybe not ready to hear it yet. So yeah, that was my long-winded answer, but there's lots of different routes that you can go.
I think that ceremony is something that is so missing in American culture.
Yeah.
That we don't realize that we're missing that. But creating these sacred moments, creating some sense of ceremony is, I think, really important in getting us to tune in, getting us to, tune in inwards and tune out from external influences that we get attached to. Creating that sense of ceremony just gives us that chance to quiet our minds. I think that you do an interesting thing where you do these ceremonies, especially with just the CBD, not even with THC, right? And that can be a really beautiful introduction for somebody into that way of, incorporating, I don't know, almost like a sense of magic a little bit into their life. And I think we have that sense of magic when we're kids, and we lose that because it's trained out of us as we get older. And tuning back into that is so powerful. For those of us who don't have any type of ceremony in our life, what's a little way to crack open the door and create a little ceremony for ourselves?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to answer this without even a substance at all. One of my favorite questions ever. So one thing is like, so this one's for the women. Sorry, men, but I'll get to you in a moment. But I've started paying a lot more just attention to like my infradian cycle. So, where I am on my flow, and also the moon. So I can't always like make it to watch the full moon. I try, but I do, no matter where I'm at, try and make a ritual of like when it's a full moon, I'll do like a nice bath with Epsom salt and maybe light a candle. And so that's like my ritual. And there's something in my mind that's so great, like expecting it's the full moon tomorrow, so I know what I'm doing. And there's this safety, like, yeah, like, that's my thing. So just paying attention to my cycle, like I said. So I have like 4 days a month where I just rest and I just listen to music, and then I keep it very like low. And like that's a ceremony in itself, just like my personal practice when I wake up in the morning is after like I brush my teeth and stuff is I'll do like 5-10 minutes of breath work just before I start my day. And I know that it's like I set my alarm 5 or 10 minutes earlier before my son or anyone else is awake. And I know that that's my little quiet time. You know, if I want to make it ceremonial, maybe I'll light a candle and like candle gaze while I do it. Just finding like just so much intention. And you can get so intentional with it, like a walking meditation. You can go in your yard. I've done one on a yoga mat before when I didn't even have room to walk. And I just walked forward and backward, but a very like intentional heel toe, sort of. There's so many things. Your water is a huge thing. So structuring your water, you do not have to have like some fancy water machine like a Kangen. It's great if you do. I'm a huge like
I did have one, but
a
yes,
little bit of a water. I have a Berkey, so I am a water snob. But I will say like just structuring it and taking that time to thank the water, or just structure it in that way, because honoring your water is honoring yourself. I think it's like 70% water or something like that. You're honoring yourself. And just by doing that, you're bowing to that like innate wisdom within, not outside of you, within. So those are just like a few little things. Gratitude journaling, and like I remember in like the beginning of my journey, that was something I started my day with before I got a little deeper into the breath work that I'm in now, because I realized like, well, it just made sense to me. If I start my day and before I look at my screen or do anything, I just write 5 things that I'm grateful for, and then I walk out the door, and someone like side swipes my car or something. Well, at least I was going from here to here and not here to here, on a vibrational level. So yeah, those are just a few things. It doesn't have to be an entheogen, and in fact, like it shouldn't all the time. Those things are meant for deeper work, but they're meant to be integrated. They're not meant to be an everyday thing. And the goal is that you can reach those higher altered states of consciousness eventually without even needing any sort of exogenous substance, because you've gone so deep within yourself. You can get there with meditation or breath work, or what it is that your tool is.
Meagan, will you please tell everyone how they can find you, see what you're up to, potentially work with you?
Yeah,
I know you
absolutely.
do so many things. Mhm.
Yeah, I do a few things. I do the ceremonies, and that's mostly in Florida. Although I did get flown out to Texas to do one this year, so that was kind of cool. You can follow me on Instagram. It's Meggy Jane 420, MEAGGYJANE 420. So you can send me a message on there. I'm also happy to share my email with you if you want to post it or something when you do a post as well. I do some one-on-one like coaching. I do like to work with people who are sort of in that stage with their autoimmune. And also my favorite type of consult is like someone who might want to restructure their relationship with cannabis, or dive deeper into like the question you asked, like what's an entheogen and how would I prepare myself, and do this personal work over the next few months to set myself up for success and the ultimate surrender. So yes, I'm sort of a jack of all trades, I guess, but healing is my passion. So yes, that's my Instagram, and I'll send you the email because I have a long last name. So I'll type that out for you.
Perfect. I'll put all of that in the show notes so everyone can find you and reach out to you. And if there's one last thought that you want to leave with our listeners, around ceremony or around healing, anything that we didn't touch on today?
I would say I'd say a good first step for anybody is using that breath. So I don't think I put as much emphasis on the breath as I would have liked to today, but it's not only just a bridge to those states of consciousness, it's a bridge to that rest and digest stage, which, as we discussed, a lot of us aren't living in. And it can feel even odd and foreign. When we don't really know what to do with ourselves. That's a beautiful first step in noticing those matches, that power. Oh, I did that. I just breathed. I just did this breath, and I calmed myself down from something that maybe I would have had to pop a Xanax for, or have a beer, or, something exogenous. But I did that by myself with my own life force. So if I could leave a takeaway, it would be start with that. And it doesn't have to be some fancy pranayama. It can just be long, deep breaths and just quiet the mind and notice those shifts, and do that once in a while, because you'll create this sort of body memory of bliss, and you're digging this little neural groove is what you're doing, and you're going to remind yourself that you do have the power to get back to a calm state or at any time. So I just wanted to put emphasis on that. The breath is so important. My partner has a beautiful organization called the Willful Warrior, and he works with a lot of advanced Dr. Joe students and things like that. So he's working on a double doctorate in neuroscience, neuropsychology. And he was a combat veteran who was a quadriplegic and told he'll never walk again. And he completely healed himself. He's definitely a nerd. So he basically took these ancient, pre-existing techniques, but refined this method. And there's a huge group with a huge following and stuff of just amazing stories of people with MS and Parkinson's, and all these people who are just feel like they're in it alone and stuff, using the breath. And it's amazing. So maybe he could join me next time, or he would be a wonderful person. Yeah, he would be a wonderful person. We've done some cool stuff together with breath work and bringing cannabis into it for patients. And so it's been a big tool in my life. And yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to doing that, and everyone will keep you posted. And thank you again, Meagan, for being here and sharing. You've brought a lot of value to our listeners.
Thank you. It is an honor. And if it touches one person, then that's a success to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So as we close, I want to revisit a quote that Meagan said in the conversation that we had. She said, "Your body holds more wisdom than your deepest philosophy." In other words, we can try to left brain ourselves out of any situation till we're blue in the face. But if you're not tuning in to the innate wisdom of your body, of your soul, of your different energy layers, of the inner workings of your cells and your heartbeat and your organs, it has its own wisdom. It's an ancestral wisdom that starts from the beginning of time. And if we're ignoring that facet, if we're ignoring that incredible body of wisdom stored within your own body, then you aren't tapping into your true power, to your true autonomy in whatever situation it is that you are going through, that you are trying to manage. So I think it's so important to have this conversation about ceremony, about trust in your body, trust in yourself, trust in God's plan, and allowing that to draw out natural healing abilities, and allowing that to help us refine our toolbox, as she says, in finding the right pathways externally that can help us heal internally. So I just invite you to sit with that and to feel that out and explore that and get curious about what that might mean or what that might look like for you. Reach out to Meagan, reach out to myself if you're ready to take that bigger responsibility in your health and healing, in your life journey. If you are ready to up-level your health, I would love to chat with you about it. I invite you to apply for a clarity call and let's connect. Let's talk about what it is that you're going through, and let's brainstorm and figure out what those next game-changing steps could be for you in your health to level up. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.